Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Tech Tuesday. My name is Vanessa, and today we have Bridget McFadden, who is one of our ITS communication specialists and avid Adobe Illustrator user. So we are going to be discussing how to create basic shapes in Adobe Illustrator today. If you've never used Illustrator before or have only just kind of dabbled in it and didn't quite know what every function or button was for, you're in the right place today. Before we begin, I just want to mention that I am recording today's session. So if you need to go back and look at it later, I'll have the recording up sometime later today, and we'll be sending you a copy of the recording as well as some helpful links about how to use the tool in the email to the email address that you provided when you registered for today's session. We also have quite a few people on today, so everybody's mics are muted, but if you do have a question for Bridget at some point during the presentation, please feel free to put it in the chat. You just hit the chat bubble at the bottom of your Zoom window, and you can type in your questions there. And periodically during the presentation, Bridget will be, pausing and answering any questions that you guys may have. But other than that, thanks for joining. And Bridget, take it away.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Vanessa. And thanks everyone for zooming in to basic shapes in Adobe Illustrator. If you've come to one of these Illustrator sessions before, you might be hearing some repeat information, but we are going to be drawing something new. So maybe we'll go over some things that you wanted to see again. So first of all, by means of introduction, today we're going to look at how you can use Adobe Illustrator to draw basic shapes and figures to enrich your daily outputs. Specifically, we're going to look at how to use Illustrator to draw shapes and lines. And we're actually going to make postcards today in the spirit of staying connected when we can't hang out in person. So Illustrator can be used to make some of the graphic assets you might be relying on Word or PowerPoint right now. When you make them in Adobe Illustrator, you create them with a more sophisticated tool, and you create them in a file format that's preferred by many publications, which is the vector file format, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. This little diagram in the bottom left-hand corner is actually drawn in Illustrator, just using shapes and lines. Oh, and it might look familiar to you. It is the college. Okay, so let's first start by how do I get Adobe Illustrator if you don't already have it on your computer? So Illustrator is an application within Adobe Creative Cloud. Creative Cloud is available to Weill Cornell Medicine faculty and staff at no additional cost. You can request a license by going to my helpdesk.weill.cornell.edu, clicking request something, and then filling out this little request form here, the Adobe Creative Cloud request form, where you just input your information and then also make sure you detail a reason for why you need Creative Cloud, which can be something as simple as I draw scientific figures, I make flyers, anything like that. Students, unfortunately, we can't offer a license to Creative Cloud at no cost, but if you go to weillcornell.onthehub.com, you can get the package for a very discounted rate. All right, what is Adobe Illustrator? Adobe Illustrator is an industry standard vector graphics tool. It creates files with the extensions AI, which stands for Adobe Illustrator, EPS, and PDF. EPS stands for Encapsulated PostScript. It was invented by Adobe in the 90s, and it's basically just a way to package the type of vector graphics that you create in Illustrator in the similar way that a photographic image file is stored as a JPEG. The really important thing about Adobe Illustrator and why we love it is that it creates vector-based art, which is resolution independent. What does this mean? Here's an example of art on the right-hand side that is drawn in vector, which is resolution independent, versus art on the left, which is stored as a JPEG or a TIFF. It's kind of photorealistic, drawn with pixels, and it is resolution dependent. So resolution refers to the number of pixels in an image. It's usually stated as DPI, dots per inch, which refers to printing, or PPI, pixels per inch, which is how you see an image on your screen. Pixels are little picture elements. They're tiny squares of individual color, and they make up what you see. Raster graphics or bitmap images are made up of pixels on a grid. And these are like the photographs you take with your digital camera. With bitmap images, the image can only be scaled up to a certain size before the individual pixels become visible and the image starts to look bad. We all deal with so much digital photography now. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. You know, when you send an image as a smaller file and then you blow it up and it starts to look blurry. Vector images in contrast, are not composed of pixels. They're actually instructions for drawing the image. So instead of being recorded as blocks in a grid, they are made up of lines and points and curves. And because they're kind of just a combination of mathematical coordinates, they can be blown up to any size and still remain sharp. So that's what it means when we say a vector graphic is resolution independent. It means it can be as small or as big as you need it, and it's going to maintain that clear appearance. Here's one more example of what I'm talking about. Painting with pixels versus drawing with vectors. You can see if you zoom in really closely, you can see kind of all these little grids of color versus the vector image on the right is just drawn in points and lines on a grid. So it stays sharp when you zoom in on it. Vector images are a preferred choice of image type for things like logos and branding because they can be depicted at a very small scale or very large. Although they have many advantages, the primary disadvantage is that vector images are not suitable for producing photorealistic imagery because they're usually made up of solid areas of color or gradients. They can't always depict the continuous subtle tones that you see in a photograph. So a lot of vector images you see will tend to have a cartoon-like appearance. And the more you kind of play around with this, you develop an eye for what must be a vector and what's a pixel, kind of just based on this general appearance that you see in the different file types. So this brings us to why would I use Adobe Illustrator here in my work day to day at Weill Cornell Medicine? So with Illustrator, you can do some of the things you can do in InDesign or Photoshop, and a couple additional things too. So you can create custom logos or infographics. This is if you're working, if you're creating some custom branding for an initiative you're working on, or even for your department, Illustrator is a great place to start. You can add text to your photos. I know this is something that some of our researchers who are drawing scientific figures are doing this a lot. I know you're kind of importing JPEG images and then adding text on top for your papers. So that Illustrator is also a great tool to do something like this. You can draw figures from scratch for papers. You can make your communications cute. I know we're always kind of trying to come up with new ways to draw people's attention. You can modify floor plans. This is something I worked on with a woman in capital planning a couple years ago. And you can also illustrate data with graphs, which is kind of a different lesson in and of itself, but Illustrator does have kind of a cool graph tool as well. And here are just a couple examples of what I was mentioning, just stuff I've kind of put together over the years. The infographic on the left is actually the template of it was imported, which is something you'll kind of get adept to as well. We have an account with Getty Images, which is a place where you can download both JPEGs and vector graphics. And sometimes if we have to make, this is an infographic for an initiative on IT service management. And I think I downloaded kind of a blank vector graphic template and then filled it in, customized the colors and the text that we needed for the project we were working on. And then this was a way or the one in the middle was just a communication to try to sell Microsoft Teams. And then the image on the right is, like I mentioned, this is actually a JPEG underneath a vector drawing of cubicles and then text layered on top. So this is all things that you can do in Adobe Illustrator. And let's move forward to one more slide. There's an example of the graph tool I was mentioning, and then also an example of this floor plan modification that a woman I was working with was doing, where she was kind of just laying blocks of color on top of an existing floor plan. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to make some good old-fashioned snail mail. And this is kind of because we're approaching a year into a socially distanced lifestyle. I don't know about you, but there are a lot of people I haven't seen in person for a long time. And when you're tired of connecting via screen, sometimes it's nice to just send some good old-fashioned mail to your friends. So that's what we're going to work on today. And in doing so, I'm going to show you how to set up new documents in Adobe Illustrator, and then also how to use the Artboard tool to create this postcard shape you're looking at, how to draw basic shapes, how to do fill and stroke, which is the color of the shapes you're drawing. We're going to get into the spiral tool, the curvature tool, and the line tool, the ellipse tool to draw a couple little circles. We're going to add text. We're going to group objects. And then finally, I'll show you how to export an Adobe Illustrator file to a JPEG or a PNG, which might seem counterintuitive versus how I just talked at vector graphics. But that's how you would ultimately share what you draw in Illustrator with someone who maybe doesn't have Illustrator, or if you want to put your graphic into an email or a Word document. Before I get into Illustrator, are there any questions right now about the introduction?
I don't see any in the chat yet. Although I did want to bring up the request form for a Creative Cloud was actually somewhat recently updated, so students can request a license.
Amazing.
You
Okay.
just have to choose between faculty and staff and student. They work the same, but the licenses are separated for some reason. So students can request it through the same request form now. And if you want a personal copy still of Adobe Creative Cloud, you can still use on the hub and put it on your personal device. And it is at a very significantly discounted rate. So definitely check it out if you're interested.
Cool. I didn't know that. That's good news. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. No problem.
All right. Awesome. Let me close out of this. And I'm going to share a different screen so that we can get into this demo. Okay. All right, Vanessa, can you see the Adobe Illustrator screen?
I can.
Okay, awesome. So what you are all looking at right now is something I've already kind of set up, but I'm going to go back to the beginning to show you when you first open Illustrator, how you're going to get started. So let's go to File, New, and hopefully this works. Vanessa, can you see the dialog box for New Document?
Yes, with the untitled to all that stuff. Or
Uh, yes, yep,
yeah.
exactly. In the preset details,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay, I can't quite tell in Zoom like what it shows and what's
No,
not.
no, I can see it. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so when I open up File New, this is kind of the same way if you were to open like a new document in Microsoft Word, it's working the same way. I want to start with a little postcard shape. So we have this preloaded document set up for a 4x6. And actually up here, it's telling me the width is 4, the height is 6. I want it to be horizontal orientation like a postcard would be. So let's just select that. We're going to leave everything else in there. Hit create. And then you've got here at the top, you see here's my new Untitled 2 document with this one artboard that's measuring at 6 across and 4 down. I'm going to zoom out a little bit because if we were setting up this postcard from scratch, I would want to create a front and a back. So to do that, you can see over here on the left is this tool panel, which looks pretty complicated now, but you will get used to it. And there's also a guide I will send you after the session that gives you a description of what every tool does. We're going to hover down here to the Artboard tool. And again, you can see when you hover your mouse over a tool, it shows you what it is. If I select Artboard tool, it's going to create this little blue line around the white square. The artboard is kind of your canvas. This is what you're going to draw on top of, and you can make this bigger or smaller if you want, and you can also draw more of them. So if I wanted to draw another right below it, that's how I would do it. If I wanted to just copy this artboard so that I have one the exact same size, I would select the artboard, hold down the Alt key, and remember the shortcut because you will use it all the time. That's how you duplicate objects. And that's kind of the same. I think it works the same in PowerPoint. Alt is kind of how you duplicate things. So when I have the Alt key held down, I can drag out, ooh, this other artboard right next to it. Hang on, I got messed up in my Zoom. Let me zoom out again. Hold down Alt and drag out another artboard right next to it. And then you've got 2 equal sized artboards. One's going to be the front, one's going to be the back. If you look up in the upper left-hand corner, you can see you've got little numbers to these artboards, 01, 03, 02. Think of these almost as page numbers because when you go to export art from Illustrator, if you want to only export art that's on a certain area, you're going to select a range of artboards and it will be this number up at the top. We'll get to that at the end of the demo also. But that is how you set up basically a new document in Illustrator. Any questions about how to set up a document?
None yet.
Okay, awesome. So let's go over to the thing we've already gotten started on. And I'll zoom in and we're just gonna play around and draw some things and add some text. Okay, so what I have this set up is, this is our snail mail. This is the front of the postcard where it's got some text on it. It has this little figure. And then the backside just has text. And these are all little individual lines that we've drawn. So let's start with the back because that's kind of the simpler thing to work on. How do I draw a straight line? So over on my tool panel, we've got the selection of tools. If you see a little white arrow in the bottom right-hand corner, it means that there are other like tool options underneath the one that you see on top. So if I click and hold the arc tool, I can see that this also is the tool that lets me draw a line segment, a spiral, a rectangle, or a polar grid. let's just select the line segment tool and go over to our artboard here. And then I'm going to kind of just click in the middle and then hold the shift key down. And that lets me draw a perfectly straight line. And when I'm done drawing, I'm just going to release. So now that I've released this line tool, let me go back over to my selection tool to kind of unselect it. And you can see that on the right, on this properties tab, under appearance, I have a box that says fill and a box that says stroke. Fill is the color of the center of an object. Stroke is the outline of an object. Since we've just drawn this one line, it's only coloring the stroke. And this is also right next to it. This little box lets me select how thick I want the line to be. So right now it's set at 3 point. Let's do a little bit more elegant than that and drop back down to 1. If I wanted to change the color, I would click on this box next to stroke, and then it's going to bring up this kind of pre-selected palette. And right now I have it set to this dark gray. Maybe I'll just make it like one lighter gray, or even so you can see like a dark red. That's how I would change the lines on that. I'll go back again, go back to gray, and we've got one straight line. Great. So this is separating where I'm going to write my text from where I'm going to write my address. Now let's draw a couple more straight lines for where we're going to write the actual address. I'll go back over to the line segment tool, select it, and then kind of do the same thing. Click on my artboard, hold down the shift key to draw a straight line, pull it right over. Ooh, let's try one more time. And then release when you're done. There we go. And let me go back and fix this one that I messed up. This is the one I kind of like, this straight line. And now instead of drawing 3 other ones, I'm going to use that same Alt shortcut. Click on my line tool and hold Alt, and then I'm going to drag up just a duplicate of this line shape so that I don't have to kind of fiddle around with making sure I have the right length. This is how I'm just duplicating a line segment that's the exact length of the one I just drew. And then we're going to pull it down. Oh, it's going to make me one more. You can see these magenta guidelines it's giving me. And right now it's showing me that the 2 lines are spaced out just perfectly. So that's good. I'm going to leave it. Guys, sorry, this works when I'm alone. Okay, there we go. So we have 3 straight lines. From here, we can add this rectangle and some text. So to do that, we're switching to another tool. We're going over to the tool panel, and the ellipses is actually also hiding the rectangle tool, as well as rounded rectangle, polygon, star, and flare. So holding this down, I'm just going to select the rectangle tool, go up to this upper right-hand corner, and pull out a nice rectangle. And then you can see, so we've got a rectangle with a solid gray line around it, but nothing in the middle. So let's select this again and go back over to the appearance panel. And then I'm going to click on fill and select one of these light grays as well. And I don't actually want a stroke on this one. I just want the fill color. So I can go back to stroke and either click on the color and go over to this white box with a red dash, which would just eliminate the stroke, or I could also play with this. Like if it had been set to 1, I would just reduce this down to 0, and that would have the same effect of getting rid of the stroke. So that's how you draw a simple rectangle. Now let's add some text on top of this. To do that, I'm going to go over to this T. This is the type tool. Select the type tool and then draw out a box, and it's going to fill in some of this just filler text. I will delete this and write the word stamp goes here, because this is going to be the little box where we tell people where to put their stamp. So you can see I've typed in my text, but I kind of want to play with the size and the font and the spacing. So let's select the text, and then you can see over here on the right, now that we are working with the type tool, we have a character menu. And this again is very similar to what you would use in Microsoft Word. It lets you select the font type, the weight, and then some of these different size tools and spacing tools. So I actually want to use, I think I was using 1898 Sans. It's our Weill Cornell font. And I want to do, I'm going to bump this up to bold so that everyone can see it. Maybe make it a little bit bigger. And then this little tool right here lets me increase the spacing between the words. And then I also kind of want to center my text. So I'll drop back down to paragraph, center it here. Let's make this lowercase s. Cool, I think that looks pretty good. I'm gonna select this text box and just pull it over on top of the rectangle, make sure it fits. I wanna make the text white. So again, I'll highlight one more time, head on over here to the fill box under appearance, select white, and there we go. And we can try this one more time. We'll just add one more text item. We're gonna add the little message to our postcard. Draw out a horizontal box now. And let's say, sending you a little snail mail. And again, we'll go back over and kind of play around with the weight of the text, the size of the text. You can see here, the text is bigger than the box we've drawn, and it's indicating that by this little red plus mark. So then you just have to adjust the size of your text box. So I'm gonna go on over to the black selection tool and drag out the size of the text box, and then you can see all the text now. So that's what we want. That's what we want to work with. And maybe we'll center that. And all right, not a bad start. Any questions on drawing lines, creating text, drawing rectangles?
We don't have questions about that specifically, not yet. I'm answering some of the questions in the chat, but
Okay.
I did get a question about how do we convert images, slides, figures that we've created in PowerPoint into a vector graphic format for that's suitable for publication, so the figures don't pixelate. Robert, I don't know if you saw my answer in the chat. So in general, you can copy and paste figures that you created in PowerPoint into Illustrator and clean them up from there. But like you just have to remember that Microsoft products and Adobe products, they're not created by the same company. So the transition is not always seamless. So if you've got a really complicated figure that you've created in PowerPoint that's like 100 pieces or something like that, like polygons, and then try to move it over into Illustrator. Illustrator might go a little crazy. It might work for much simpler objects, and you could just paste them over there and just save them as vector from there. So hopefully that helps. And Bridget, there was a question about Getty Images.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Also, and good question, good answer on the Microsoft Word question. Getty Images is something we actually got a subscription for it through our department. So that's something, if you go to, I think it's just gettyimages.com. I can look it up later. It is something you have to buy a subscription to, but once you have the subscription, there's a certain amount of images you can download. Does that answer the question?
I believe so. And then Margaret, what is the Alt key on a Mac? I hope you saw the answer was Option. That's the
Oh
Option.
yeah, sorry. It says Alt at the top, Option on the bottom.
No, it's okay. And Robert, does that work? Oh, for the different version of Office? I'm not sure. I can look that up for you while Bridget is continuing her demo. But yeah, go ahead, Bridget.
Okay, awesome. Good questions. Okay, let's work on the front of the postcard and we'll just play with a couple more of these tools. And I'm going to undo some things I did. Okay, let's pretend this blue wasn't there. And I want to draw the blue background for the front of the postcard. So again, I'm gonna go to the rectangle tool and draw out a rectangle that's gonna cover the entirety of this artboard because I want it to cover the whole front. So you can see I have this nice blue color, which I'm going to show you where to pull up some different swatch options too. But when I pull it out on front, it has obscured the text because I just drew a rectangle on top of the text object. So let me go back to the selection arrow, make sure this is selected, go to Object Arrange. And this gives you a couple options for moving the objects behind or in front of each other. I want the blue rectangle to be at the very bottom. So I'm going to send it straight to the back. And you can see now it's underneath my text object. And I actually don't want to mess with this background anymore. So I'm going to go to Object and lock it. So just go to Lock Selection. And then now if I were to try to select things on this artboard or like move other things onto it, I wouldn't move that background object around because it's locked into place. And you can unlock it too if you decide you want to change it. Okay, let's also, so I do the background rectangle. I will also add this little text box one more time so that we can go over that. but that's the same process as before. We're just drawing out a text box. It's going to fill it with filler text. We'll write the words hello. Bump up the size to, you can also type this in. I think this was like 72. So it's nice and large and attention getting, and play with the color and the format, and good. Let's go to Railway. I think that's what I used before. Okay, so we've got that text on the front, and now to add this snail, which is kind of the animal of the hour. We're going to use a couple different tools, spiral, arc, ellipses, and the curvature tool. So I was kind of looking at pictures of snails yesterday to figure out how to draw this. And Illustrator, lucky enough, underneath the line segment tool has something called the spiral tool, which is basically a snail shell. So we're just going to keep it easy, select the spiral tool. And there's a couple different ways to play with this one, as there is for basically any tool in Illustrator. You can just select the tool and draw it out, and you'll kind of get, this kind of free form object. Or let me delete that. Or you can select the spiral tool and click on the artboard, and it pulls up this dialog box that has some attributes for the spiral you're drawing. These, I don't think you're going to remember what these are. I had to look them up. Radius with the spiral tool is radius is the distance from the center to the outermost point. Decay is the amount by which each wind should decrease relative to the previous wind. Segments is how many segments each spiral has. Again, I will probably forget this as soon as the demo's over, but if there's ever a tool where you're kind of like, what does all this mean? Adobe Help is excellent, and you can really like Google any Illustrator tool and it will tell you exactly what all this stuff means. And I just kind of played around to figure out what I wanted these values to be so that it looked the way I wanted it. So it's a little bit of trial and error. It does let you choose the style though, which kind of tells you where the spiral is going to end. This one on the right is much more snail-like, so we're going to go with that. Or did I get that wrong? Hang on, the other one. Okay, there we go. Because I want the snail shell to end right here so that we can draw the little body. So you can see we've got the shape drawn, but if I clicked out of this, you wouldn't see it. It's invisible, right? So this is where we have to go back over to the appearance and play around with the stroke color and also the stroke width and make it a little more visible. So there we go. There's the start of this spiral. So now we need to add in a couple other elements to the snail using new tools. So let me pull this down. And again, I'm going to do this Alt trick where I have the object selected. I'm going to hold Alt, drag it over onto the new artboard so that I can show you how to get into another couple tools. One of them being to draw this, like the little tail and the body and the head, we're going to transfer over to the curvature tool. The curvature tool lets you draw free-form paths without dealing with direction handles. You also have a pen tool here that works with the Bezier curve, which I think is a tricky thing to master. You're kind of dealing with all these like directional handles that make the curves go in crazy ways that you didn't expect. Curvature tool is a little bit easier to work with. So with this selected, I'm just going to zoom in here and start kind of drawing the bottom. What I did find is if I started drawing right on this path, it gave me some issues. So I'm going to start my first point kind of close, but not on the path of the spiral. And you're basically just dropping little anchor points. To draw a sharp curve, double click, and that lets you kind of like draw a point. And then just kind of keep going, dropping points until we come up to the head. One cool thing with the curvature tool is while you're still drawing, I could go back and manipulate the shape of it just by clicking on this little white anchor point and dragging it out. And then you can just keep going. And this is actually looking pretty good. Again, I'm going to end the shape close, but not on the spiral. And that looks, yeah, that's Not bad. I think I'm happy with that. So let's escape to click out of it. And we've got, more or less the body of this snail. I want to add antenna and a face. So to do the antenna, let's go into the arc tool, which is under the same, in the same family as the line, segment, and spiral tool. Select that. I'm just going to click. And again, this is something where you can kind of play with length to get the length that you want or the curvature that you want. I'm going to plop it right on the artboard. And then from there, kind of play with the size of it. I think I have these facing the other way. So you can see I want the curve of the antenna to be facing the middle. So with this selected, if I hover my little cursor out to the corner, I get this curved arrow, and that lets me rotate it to flip it around just like that. Then I can put this into place. And then I'm using the arrow tools on the keyboard now to make really subtle little movements to get it into place on this shape. I want the exact same antenna on the other side because they have to be the same. So again, we're going to Alt drag it over. And I want to make it like a mirror image. So instead of using the arrows this time, you can just go on up to Object and hit Transform and then Rotate. And this is going to bring up another dialog box where it lets you punch in the angle to which you want to rotate it. I did 90 just to get an exact mirror image. Hit OK, and here you've got a second one that looks exactly the same. And let's draw two little balls on top of these using, we're going to go back to the rectangle tool, click on it and hover over, and then select the ellipse tool. And this lets you draw circles. And I'm going to draw out two. So if I were to just draw freeform with the ellipse, I would get this oval like this. To draw a perfect circle, you're going to hold your Shift key down and draw down the ellipse. And that keeps the circle in proportion. So let's go here and draw one little circle there. I want to fill it in. So I'll go over to stroke and actually, we'll get rid of the stroke in just a moment. Why don't I fill it first so that you can see how that works. We'll fill in the circle and then eliminate the stroke by clicking on this none. And then we've just got that little bulb. Back to the selection tool. And we're going to use the same little trick. Click on the ellipses, hold down the Alt key, drag it over to get the second one. And one more important piece will be the face. Let's try the arc tool again. But this time, I want it to be shaped. I want the curve to be a little bit deeper. So what I'll do is make sure we have the stroke drawn in so that you can see. I'm going to select the path of this actually using this direct selection tool. Direct selection tool lets you get right into these individual elements of a shape. Select tool selects things all at once. You can see it draws a box around the entire thing. It's kind of something to keep in mind. If you ever want to get into the details of an object, you're probably going to want to deal with this direct selection tool. With this selected also, I can add an anchor point to this curve by heading over to this Add Anchor Point tool. And then I'm going to go right to the middle of the path that I've just drawn, drop in an anchor point, and then I can hover over this. Where is it? There's the anchor. And kind of drag this out so that we have a narrower shape. Rotate it a little. Resize. And there we go, draw it into shape, draw it into place. From here, now I've got the shape drawn on this artboard, but I'd like to move it into this one. So what I'm gonna do is group all of these objects into one shape so that it's easier to move. So let me go ahead and get rid of, these are just kind of examples of what we were going to do, and I don't want to include them in the grouping. With the selection tool highlighted, just drag a little box over the whole thing, making sure you are capturing all of the different pieces that you've drawn. Whoop, I'm going to start over. I want to make sure I get all of the shapes that I put together. So the spiral, the curvature tool, and then the arc and the ellipses that we just drew. with all of these selected, I'm going up to Object, and I'm going to select Group. And now it's put all of these into one piece, which I can then select, hold down Alt, and drag up to this other artboard. And then we can kind of play with where we want it to sit and how large we want it to be. And this is also, once you have it on this background, this is when you can kind of start to play with color. So if I wanted to change the color of the lines, again, I'll select my object and then head over to stroke and play with the different colors that you want your figure to be. While I do this kind of tedious work of filling in the color, any questions so far on using any of those drawing tools we just went over?
I don't see any yet. Guys, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we're happy to answer them.
Awesome.
I did have, just a reminder for those who signed in late, I did get a question about how to request a copy of Illustrator or Creative Cloud rather, since Illustrator is part of it. And just a reminder, it's at myhelpdesk.weill.cornell.edu and it'll be under request forms. There's one called Adobe Creative Cloud request form. So you can find it there.
Great. Well, let's do one more kind of important part of this, which is, let's say I've got this postcard drawn out the way I want it in Illustrator. So it is a .ai file, but I want to be able to put this in an email or put it in a Word document, or even maybe pop it in. Like sometimes I print using a PowerPoint template just because printers can be so, I just find it to be a battle, like getting your printer to do what you want it to do. So I'm going to show you now how to export something from Illustrator into a JPEG so that you can use it a little bit more easily. Let's go back to the Artboard tool right here. And again, so you can see when I have the artboard selected, I've got this little number 7 in the upper right-hand corner. I want to export only what I've drawn on this artboard right here, so the pink snail. So to do that, I'm going to go up to File, Export, and let's just do Export As. I think that's like a quick PNG export. And it's going to bring up, again, the format that you can choose, which is PNG, bitmap. You can choose JPEG if you like. And I'm going to click Use Artboards, and this is where I select my range. So if I wanted to do front and back, I would select 1 to 2. In this case, I just want to do this snail. So it's going to be Artboard 7. 7's the number that I'm going to type into that range window. And then let's call this snail mail pink, just so I know what I'm working with. And that will export to a PNG. Again, you've got options for choosing resolution. PNG backgrounds are always going to be transparent, which is something to keep in mind too. JPEG has a white background, PNG has transparent, which can matter depending on what you're working on. Click OK. And then if I were to go back into my files, I can pull up the PNG of that so you can see. I'm going to stop share really quickly, and then I'll show you the file image. Any questions while I dig through my documents?
Yeah, there's a question from Emily Yang, and it might be more helpful to show when you can pull up the Illustrator.
Okay.
She wanted to know how you might fill in the gaps between the strokes that you were doing.
Okay, yeah. Let's go back to that. First, I'll go to that in just 1 second, Emily. That's a great question. But I will show you. Can you see now the little PNG file?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So this is just, it exported as a PNG to my documents, and then you pop it up, and then you've just got this image file, and you can, do whatever you need to with it. But let's go back to Illustrator. Here we go. So let me zoom back into the first one we drew. So you're saying just like connect this stroke to that one, right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay,
And
cool.
Emily, feel free to chime in if you need clarification on it.
I will get very close to this. Hit Command and plus lets you zoom. That's the shortcut to zoom. And then using this white one, select this, select your path, and then just kind of draw this anchor as close as you can get it. And that will, and then you can kind of play around, like depending on how precise you want to be. That's how I would connect these points. So again, it's this direct selection tool, select your path, hover over this little white point, which is your anchor, and then kind of draw it a little bit closer. You can get closer than that even. Does that more or less answer your question, Emily?
I will wait for Emily to confirm.
Okay.
Yes, it did. Thank
Awesome.
you, Emily.
Okay. Of course. We've got about 5 minutes left. I'm happy to stay on and answer questions or like redo some of the things we went through. Or if not, I thank you all for coming. And I hope this was helpful. And also, I'm available for any one-off questions you have. If you want to see things again or get into things a little more closely, I'm happy to set up a call. And I'm also going to send an email out after the session that has some links to helpful guides and even tutorials that you can kind of do at home to practice some of the things that we did in the demo.
Yeah, it doesn't look, we're just getting a lot of thanks to you, Bridget,
Okay, cool.
showing people how to do things. Just as a reminder, before everybody signs off, the session is recorded. I'll make sure that it's up later today, and I'll send Bridget the recording link so that she can mail out, those links that she mentioned in today's session. And like Bridget said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We don't only, do demos on Illustrator. We try to do InDesign Basics and a few other creative cloud tools, just because we realize that they're pretty popular, but they're also very complex software. So we give our best to try to at least get you in the basics so that you can kind of explore and see what how you can use it best for the work that you do at the college. So without further ado, Bridget, I think we're done with the questions.
Okay.
And don't worry, Robert, we will send the link about how you can request the software. So don't worry about that. We'll make sure that's in the follow-up email.
Awesome. Thank you, Vanessa, for managing the chat and answering all these questions so well. And thanks everyone for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you, Bridget. And thanks everybody for taking some time to learn about Illustrator today. Have a good one.